What is going on, peacemakers, and welcome back to the video. So today's video, we're actually killing two birds with one stone, and we're going to go over gluttony and greed. Now, the reason why I want to do two at one time is because they play into one another. It's not that I want to rush this or anything like that. It's just that they play into each other so well, and they actually, in their very own definitions, use their own kind of verbiage, their own kind of, their definitions kind of lean on each other and feed into each other, and it becomes a little too consistent or too similar, not to mention together, right? So I want to jump into this. So we'll start off with gluttony's definition and then greed's definition. So gluttony's definition is the habitual done or doing consistently or as a habit, greed or excess in eating. And then we can move on to greed, which is intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. I think that is just very telling. So then the question becomes, why are these bad for us, right? What's the physical application to why this is bad, and why is this spiritually bad for us? Leaning into the consistency of our line of thinking when it comes to First Corinthians 15:44. There is a natural body, there is a supernatural body, or there is a spiritual body. So why? What's the deal with that, right? Why is gluttony and greed bad for us? So let's take the social but also physical aspect of it, okay? And let's just point out some key information in here, right? Starting off with habitual doings, or I'm sorry, habitual consistency of greed, and then using greed's definition, intense selfishness and desire. So right there, we have a few key components that really, in a very drastic way, in a very evolved way, tend to lean down a very dark and spiral direction downwards, right? These key components in a very negative manner have detrimental and deadly effects to the point in which create sociopaths or create killers in a very unorganized manner that kind of just leaves it more in the sense of, truly in the sense of just acting upon feelings and emotions and acting upon habitual desires and consistent habits of greed and selfishness when it comes to certain aspects of our life that will tend to make us very unpopular. Something that is very consistent with sociopaths or just school shooters or whatever the application of that evil doer is doing. What it tends to stem from is a disconnection of social structure. Basically, just to say, these tend to create outcasts in social applications. When a undeveloped brain, or in every sense of the word, honestly, a young individual who gives off habitual and consistent habits of greed, selfish desires, especially when it comes to like their prized possessions or whatever they deem their prized possessions, will widely make them unpopular amongst their peers. Children who aren't willing to share and play well with one another will quickly become casted out amongst bigger groups, right? And it's important. It's important to see that in children and to rectify that in children. And that's where the moral teachings and understanding is so crucial and so important. Now, it is possible that it really will it really could just come down to a undeveloped or imperfect development of the brain that really just stems from, well, more medical than social or you know moral values could offer, right? I mean, it's something deeper, right? Because it's stemming from something a little bit more physical than um, perhaps social or mental, for lack of a better term. So when you create this character of outcast who has a habitual consistency of greed and selfish desires when it comes to you know wealth, power, whatever wealth and power is dictated by the evildoer or by this outcast individual who sees it upon himself to act in such a manner that brings him some type of pleasure, right? Or else, if it didn't bring him some type of pleasure, why would this individual be acting upon it, right? So it obviously does something. And that right there is interesting to kind of dive into and interact with, is to what do we get out of it? And it's one of the things that I think is very interesting about envy, which we will be getting into, is what do we really get out of it, right? And I think it's kind of this play on something that we don't necessarily directly get, but secondhand get, right? And I really want to get into that more about envy. I don't really want to talk about that right here, right now, because it's something that's still kind of undeveloped. I don't really have a key phrase for this yet, but it's in the works. It's going to be an interesting conversation, envy. And I'm interested in it, but I digress. We're talking about something else here. So the physical application could have absolutely detrimental characteristics to it, in which makes people widely unpopular. And if they are widely unpopular, they're more than likely to lash out and do some, very questionable things. They're willing to engage and just I really don't have any words for it. They're willing to engage in things that aren't quite so they're willing to engage in activities that would lash out some of their frustration, but also therefore on the flip side of that, give them the tension that they're looking for in a way in which may not be good, but it's nonetheless what they're looking for, right? And if you've ever heard the saying, looking for love in all the wrong places, it's kind of like that, looking for attention in all the wrong places. And when that becomes your key focus point of looking for attention in all the wrong places, you start to really get a desperate sense of direction, of willingness to just go after anything and everything that feeds that kind of desire or addiction. And I really think that addiction, I really don't want this to come off in a bad way, because it's not that I mean this in a derogatory way, but it's that I mean this in a way in which there may be some truth to it, depending upon the state of mind. So again, I'm going to say this, I'm very hesitant to say this because I don't want this to come out wrong, but addiction really kind of seems to be for the weak-minded. And the reason why I say that is because look at what they're becoming addicted to, And look how desperate that addiction sets into oneself. Now, I'm not trying to out myself. I mean, I'll be completely honest. I've done a lot of things that I'm not proud of. I've engaged in a lot of substances that I'm not proud of. But I've never been addicted to the point to which I could never stop. What I mean to that is, it is this mind over matter that we are really, capable of, that we're not always willing to admit. Because then that means that we're willing, or we're not, then that would mean that we don't have an excuse why not to engage in this activity, such as smoking cigarettes or drinking, right? If we are addicted to this, it kind of feels as though that gives us a medical term as to the excuse or reasoning behind why we can't actually stop what we're doing. It's a poor excuse, a lame one at that, but at the very least, it gives us this desperate sense of, closure to an explanation or an answer as to why we don't want to stop. And again, please don't let that phrase of the weak-minded really bother you, because it needs to be, you need to think about this. And maybe it does need to bother you. Maybe it does need to bother you in the sense of giving you hope to overcome it, because at the end of the day, it really could be the very thing that is stopping you from becoming your truest potential. So I don't mean that in a derogatory way that, that shuts off your listening. I mean that in a way in which will hopefully reveal something to you that you may not know about yourself. Okay, so with that being said, getting back to gluttony and greed, something that could potentially spiritually damage us is that if we become so honed in on the flesh's desires, kind of going back to the definitions, if we then become more habitual and consistent with the greed and intense selfish desires of all the other lust, wrath, envy, pride, right? These then become a very snowball effect or domino effect of a very horrifying spiraling downwards direction of immoral values and principles that could really just lead us down a very desperate and difficult direction that, quite frankly, there may not be coming any back from if we allow this to be the fuel that guides our directions, our thought process, our emotions. If we allow this to imprison ourselves to the degree in which we're willing to think it and therefore manifest it from internally to externally, then we have a real problem on our hands that could be just a ticking time bomb, and truly would only take a very bad day to set it off, or a very bad crusade, as it were. And I don't mean a good crusade, a noble crusade. I mean a very bad crusade in which we take up arms to go stop something we feel as though is worth stopping. And if an individual takes it upon themselves to do this, and they have a social concept that enables this, this propels, or this fuels the fire to allowing this burning to be manifested from internal to external. And the outcome of that can be very detrimental to anybody that is in the warpath of this individual. So, horrifying, is it not? Especially when that individual could be, looking at you as a potential target. Something that is in your, something that is in you, or something that is in he or she's way. And man, the implications of that are very, very disheartening, to be honest with you, because what can be your greatest downfall, what can be your biggest problem, your biggest enemy, could also be your greatest asset, your greatest um, resource in helping yourself get better, which is our minds. Our minds are incredible. We're not even fully comprehend. We're still not able to fully comprehend the idea of brains and thinking and what our minds are capable of. And I think it's so interesting to go down this placebo effect, because you really start seeing mind over matter, and that's kind of what we're getting into as far as the antidote to sin, right? But we're not talking about morality now. We will be talking about morality, and I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag here, no pun intended. I'm letting after this segment, and then after my next segment, how does God work in mysterious ways? In the background, I'm also going to be talking about morality, and I'm also going to be talking about the 10 Commandments that therefore kind of give us some guidance as to, okay, we know what sin is. Now, what are some good traits? What are some good habits, right, that we can follow in hopes of becoming a better version of ourselves? So, with that explanation out of the way, stay tuned for that, because I think it'll be kind of cool. Then we can kind of start getting into some amazing habits and amazing, kind of these amazing teachings that Christ taught us in the New Testament. So one of the things that the key word that I use there is manifesting from internally to externally. And this is exactly why Jesus's concept on the Mountain of Olive, why his teaching was so cool and so amazing, was that if it manifests in here, if it boils and it brews up in here, it is very likely to manifest into the physical. And I think that's kind of cool, because that's also very symbolic to the spiritual application to the world around us too, is that what starts from the spirit can also manifest into the physical. And I think that's really cool, because we can really start to see how God would work in mysterious ways through the spirit into the physical. We just have to connect the dots where where it's not so insanely obvious. Now, mind you, we also worship in the same God who, when he sent his only son on this earth, talked in parables, which only his followers would understand, because only the followers would really have an idea as to these inside jokes or inside explanations or understanding, right? And I think that opens up a whole new can of worms that we're not quite really ready for yet. But I think that's so cool. So we are manifesting, or we are boiling something that could potentially become so evil, so spiraling downwards, that we could manifest physically. And if we allow our flesh to take over our spirit, the spirit can then become a conduit for demonic oppression. It could become more receptive to listening to demonic, because it's listening to the physical flesh and desires and urges, right? And I think something that's an interesting concept there is that when we take a look at developing habits, or when we take a look at manifesting good deeds, right? One of my favorite quotes from scripture is that faith without works is dead. And that can be applied in the anti-sense of works. In a very bad way, this could also be applied, right? With faith without works is dead. Bad deeds without works is also could be dead. If you don't act upon these things, if you don't manifest these things, they kind of just fade away, right? it's kind of like muscles, right? The less you work those muscles out, the more those muscles just start to deteriorate and fade away, right? When you stop going to the gym, or when you stop doing calisthenics or exercises that work those muscles, that allow those muscles to expand and grow, because you're using them in ways in which is very repetitive and consistent, where it becomes a very fine-tuned, sharpened tool. Therefore, is, kind of evolved in a manner in which can excel. But if it's the opposite, if it's de-escalating, then it's not going to really excel. It's going to do the opposite, right? It's going to decrease. So if it decreases in a very similar manner, the spirit can become to the point, it can decrease into the point in which demonic oppression can be influential, because then you're feeding the spirit is listening to the demonic oppression that feeds the flesh. And there's three things that we commonly deal with when it's spiritual warfare. We deal with demonic oppression, we deal with the flesh's desires and temptations, and then we deal with the ways of the world. And the flesh's desires and temptations really feeds into the world's, right? Because then it's amplified to like everybody, right? Everybody's flesh's desires become oppressing, because it's this social concept of sexual immorality, wrath, greed, gluttony, pride, envy, lust, right? These things that then become amplified even more so, and that become quickly a social concept, because then it becomes just kind of widely accepted, because everybody's into it. So it doesn't take long for this snowball effect, or this domino effect, to just really take over. It doesn't take long at all. So therefore, I think really shows the application to physical and spiritual self-destruction. So let me know what you guys think, right? And again, just to reiterate this, I don't know if I said this in this video or not, but I probably will be doing a part 1 and a part 2 to most of these, right? So so these, gluttony and greed being a part 1, I will probably end up going back and doing part 2s of more applications to life that can really capitalize or hone in on the specifics of these sins and as to why they're so bad. But I think we kind of did answer to a great deal as to why greed and gluttony can be so bad for us, that it really inspires this horrible escalation or de-escalation into this spiraling pit of despair and demise that I think that we aren't quite ready for. So I digress. I think it's a very interesting concept, and I think it's a very interesting conversation for us to have as to really what gluttony and greed truly at their core are, right? And anything that has to evolve around being selfish is never a good thing. I mean, there's many examples to this. I'm trying to think of the word that I always seem to that always seems to elude me. Gosh, I knew I couldn't remember it because now it's on command, but gosh, if only there was a way for me to remember this. I should have kept notes, but it has somewhat to do with pride. It kind of borders on pride, but it really just has a lot of egotistical problem behind it. Gosh, I wish I could remember what it was. It's a characteristic, of course, but it's very can't believe I'm forgetting it. Anyways, that's pretty much it. That's really what I got for you on gluttony and greed, and the applications as to how it could be physically bad for us and spiritually bad for us. And I think it's an interesting concept to really ask ourselves, right? Like, it's an interesting thing to go down the path of why is it bad for us. And I think that's why what makes this segment, in my opinion, so interesting is that why is sin so bad for us, right? Why are these things horrible for us, right? And they're and man, the horrible implications that these can have for us could absolutely be detrimental, like to the degree and to the point in which we could absolutely self kill ourselves or self destruct. Um, and to be honest, what part of that makes us better? What part of selfishness makes us better? What part of greed, what part of gluttony makes us better? I mean, I'll tell you what overeating can get you, or excessive eating can get you really big really quick. And then you become more of a burden than anything. And that's not saying, it's not a diss, that's not fat shaming or whatever. That's literally just the reality of it, is if you become unreliant upon yourself, if it gets to the point in which you cannot provide or sustain yourself, that becomes a real issue. Because if you can't sustain yourself, you become a burden because someone else has to provide for you now. And then if you can't provide for yourself, you sure as heck can't provide for anybody else. So then there's two ways in which you become a burden. Now, God bless it, there's a lot of people here that can't help it, that have legitimate medical reasons. But there's a lot of people who utilize this empathy, or who utilize the emotional strings of other individuals. Narcissistic, that was the word I was trying to think of. Not saying that that's applicable to here, but I thought of it. It's narcissistic. I lost my train of thought. All this, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, is just to say that greed and gluttony absolutely can go down a horrible path. Not just, in one's own mind, but also then can manifest externally. What started internally can also manifest externally. And if it manifests externally, the implications or the possibilities in which these things occur in our lives could have detrimental effects to us. Could absolutely be very revealing as to the negative characteristics that we could harness. And that doesn't do any favors for us. Not absolutely, just none at all. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. Take care. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next one.